All right, good morning, everybody. My name is, as said, Assaf Barnea. I've been dealing with water, mostly water innovation the last decade or so. Starting with the fact that water within itself is truly a serious business. It is the fifth largest market on our planet, which is a $600 billion market. Usually, when you go to VCs and you, as a startup company, you want to, get investments, the VCs will ask you to see at least a designated market of $1 billion, right? Out of the $600 billion, it is estimated that the water technology part within that is about $100 billion, $125 billion. So imagine the potential of startup companies that will eventually make it to this industry. Now, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be tough, and part of my speech, and wherever I speak about it, I'm showing the ups and downs and the drawbacks and the difficulties, the true challenges of bringing a water company to the marketplace as opposed to internet companies, startups of IT, medical, and elsewhere. First of all, water and water innovation, and this is something that I'm doing almost in every presentation. Sometimes we go to a restaurant, right, and we get water spilled over our shirts. And people go and say, leave this is just water, it's not wine, there's no stain, it's going to be okay, right? But if you look into that, water, simple, transparent, actually it's not. It is a world of physics and biology and chemistry and energy and software. And these are actually the complexities that allow the innovation to come in. If it would have been that simple, there would not be any innovation. Innovation requires some kind of complexities, barriers to entry. Technology has to be a bit complicated. The startup technology has to be a little bit complicated in order to have some success, the different IP, disruptive, non-disruptive. We'll see about it and talk about it. And this expression, water innovation, actually started back in 2004. In 2004, GE bought a company called US Filter for $1 billion. GE bought Ionics for $1 billion, and actually have awakened the market. I'm saying that the Sleeping Beauty has awakened. It's not to say that the industry was not there before that, but from the eyes of investors, venture capitalists, private equity, this is what caused them to wake up and say, you know what, this, for the 21st century, this is probably an amazing market, because eventually, if giants, corporates are buying companies, there will be more and more mergers and acquisitions. These are exits in their eyes, and this is why it has turned into a sexy industry for the first time in 2004. Unfortunately, this for the last decade has changed, specifically in the last 2 years, and some of those companies have been selling their water operations. So this is to say, it is not an easy market. You have to be very realistic about your expectations. In any event, the innovation part was viewed and is now even viewed as a must. Innovation is a must. Water innovation is a must. We cannot just go with the old-fashioned pipes and valves and project as we used to. This will not be enough anymore. So innovation is a must both on the supply and on the demand side, and these are some of the examples that I will show it to you. If you walk in the streets of London, and I wrote there, let me take you by the hand and lead you to the streets of London. So whether you're familiar with that song or not, but if you do walk in the streets of London, you may see those signs. The need of replacing old aging infrastructure pipes within London. The amount of losing water in the UK, in London, is about 40%. The most expensive water that were treated and transported eventually to us, to the end user, to the consumers in London, simply go down the drain. The energy amounts that was invested, the treatment, chemicals that were injected, everything eventually goes down the drain. 40% of leaks within London. And the aging infrastructure, this is not to give London just an example, this is everywhere. In some developing countries, you may get to up to 50 or even 60% of water lost in the main pipes. In Israel, by the way, the average is about 12, which is nice. But then again, we have to somehow take it down. And we've been seeing many technologies out there that can listen to those leaks under the ground and simply give some eyes to the municipalities where the leaks are. Before that, they were clueless, blind, totally blind about the assets, their pipe under the ground. They didn't have any clue of where it's going to be next, you know. And this is not just the water that got lost. This is a collateral damage to the infrastructure, sometimes bridges, roads, and others. So these are some of the examples that will, you know, basically bring about the need to come up with innovation, preventive ways to see those leaks. This opportunity and others, the aging infrastructure projects, developing countries' needs to provide water now with urbanization, this was identified by many corporates worldwide. And we've been seeing the last decades an amazing amounts, an amazing number of corporates stepping into the water industry. LG, the TV manufacturer based in Korea, they stepped into the water industry. If you ask me what's the synergy, I yet not to be understood by me yet, but probably there is some. IBM, even IBM, take IBM for instance. If I would have come to you 5 years ago and said IBM had stepped into the water, you would think that I was a bit weird or so. IBM and water, what's the relationship with it? But now it makes a perfect sense, you know, more data, smart cities, smart grid, all of a sudden it makes some sense. The largest chemical company worldwide, BASF, just bought a company, BASF, bought a company about 2 years ago called Inge, a membrane company, which was one of the nicest exits. Unfortunately, not one of so many, but this was a nice exit to some of the VCs that invested in Inge. And this was basically an interesting acquisition by the largest chemical company, which established a water division. Nevertheless, Siemens, whom I just gave the example of buying a company, US Filter, some 10 years ago, stepped out of that business and sold that water business just about 2 months ago to a private equity fund. Hutchinson, which you'll see, bought the operation that I was managing. Another corporate, a huge corporate, has stepped into that water industry. If we're looking into the VC investment, then again, we focus on VC investment. There was a peak of VC investment in water technologies back in 2008, a little bit close to $400 million. And last year, in 2013, it was expected to get somewhere. But if we look totally into VC investment, clean tech, VC investment, water investment out of which of those investment is merely 3 to 4%, which is nothing. And this is a very bothering number. VCs are not investing. Some here and there they do, but generally speaking, they don't invest in water. And unfortunately, the last year or two have invested even less than that. So this is something that is a true challenge for innovation, for startup companies, even with the Israeli system, the incubation system that I will speak about shortly. You know, the post-incubation investment, which everybody expects VCs to come in and put $3, $4, $5 million to take the companies to the marketplace, now it's becoming very, very tough. It's not happening as much, and this is something that we need to acknowledge and face that as is. Back in 2012, there was a rebound of water investment, but this was more so on the private equity side. Private equity, as opposed to venture capital, means more mature companies, companies with revenues, companies with up and running businesses, not with the technology risk. So for instance, a Dutch company that was bought about a year and a half ago by the family who owns BMW in Germany, a family office, a large family office that decided to invest and buy a Dutch-based company. This is part of those private equity investment, but less and less we see venture capitalists invest in early stage companies, more private equity, more mature investors looking to up and running companies with revenues and looking to expand their businesses. There's been some hubs of water innovation. And in this very conservative market, Israel is considered definitely a hub of innovation. Singapore is considered to be a hub of innovation. Canada as well. Some of the VCs, water-focused VCs in Canada, the government support. Netherlands, definitely. And the Boston area, we just recently announced kind of a cluster of water innovation and starting to cooperate with Israel as well. So I've been mentioning that the VCs are losing interest. Corporate VCs, on the other hand, are still active. This is the 3M, Astor Capital, ABB, BASF, and GE have been investing in water-related companies through the corporate VCs. And probably the conclusion is that startup companies, this is my recommendation to them, should look, as a result of that, should look more into strategic investor, into corporate VCs, into corporates investing in them. If they would aim their focus and go to VCs over and over again, simply they will fall into the valley of death. They will die eventually. Because till you get some revenues in this industry as a startup company, till you go to the bids and participate with municipalities and utilities for the first commercial installation, second commercial installation, you may be gone in a year or two. These are long processes, long buying cycles for those startup companies. This is not the internet. It's not a gaming application. So unfortunately, we've been seeing, not just in Israel, startup companies that eventually in that industry with great technologies simply go down to the valley of death and disappear. So on one hand, this is a true potential. The lack of innovation in that industry for decades and decades truly presents an opportunity to come up with innovation that will go to the marketplace. But if you go to the utilities and municipalities, as I said, this is a very conservative market. If you go to industrial application, oil and gas, food and beverages, those, by the way, those niches, those verticals, they are truly liked by VCs. So if at all VCs will invest in water companies, more chances these days would be some of those nature, oil and gas, water application, food and beverages, and potentially agriculture, which is related to that. Another option for such investment would be what is called waste to value, wastewater to value, or simply waste to value, which is another interesting application. On the other hand, there are some major issues in terms of financing, how you finance a project. I've been running the within Kinrot prior to Kinrot Ventures, which I was managing for the last 6 years. Just recently now, I've joined as a consultant to the World Bank IFC, and we're starting to work also on water investment and others as well. But in terms of my previous position, I was managing the business development for the national water company in Israel called Kinrot. And we've been bringing in startup companies to address the technological needs of Kinrot. A major operation. Kinrot handles about 80% of the water in Israel. Desalination plants, brackish water desalination, wastewater desalination, kind of a combination of MBRs, cloud seeding, truly a vast, not typical, by the way, to water company. This is definitely a different water company. And we were trying to bring in and finance some of those pilots. But this is a major issue for startup companies. How are you going to finance some of their first commercial installation, first beta installation, commercial, whether it's going to be paid by Kinrot, whether it's going to be paid by the city of Jerusalem or the city of Philly or Washington, D.C. So this is a major issue, financing and trying to look for their second installation. So conservativeness and infrastructure adaptation, long buying cycle, the deal flow. Unfortunately, despite whatever the notion is, we have, as investors, I'm talking as an investor, a VC investor, we haven't been seeing too much of those disruptive, game-changing technologies. Not to say that those incremental technologies, incremental startup company cannot bring a lot of value to the marketplace. They can, simply because of the lack of innovation for decades. But as VCs, if you're looking into disruptive game changer on the water industry, so-so, which is this another drawback. And there's a need for a data transparency, kind of a generic code to be discussed by companies such as Takadoos and others who are looking to provide more and more data, the IBM of the world, hopefully. Their need is to come up with a digitalized system that they know what's the data, compare the data, and not have totally different language when they come up and compare their operation. A bit about Israel in terms of the ecosystem. I was saying that there's a lack of ecosystem in the water industry. In Israel, hopefully there's a better one that we can look into. First of all, natural water refill is over 1,000 million cubic meter per year. The water consumption is a bit over 2,000. So this is basically a shortage of close to 45% of shortage on a yearly basis in Israel, which is amazing. The daily domestic consumption per capita is 250 liters per person. And we've been supplying to the Palestinian Authority and to the Jordanians under the peace treaty about 100 to 150 million cubic meter per year, By the way, their consumption, daily consumption, is much lower. Obviously, the standard of living is lower, and there is much lower than 250 liters per day. In terms of water operation, as you probably know, we've been growing up with the notion of how much water there is in the Sea of Galilee, in the Kinrot Lake. This is kind of defining the anxiety level in Israel. You know, the Kinrot went down 2 centimeters, up in 3 centimeters. This is, ever since we were kids, we had the notion of water coming from the north to the south. There's a major paradigm shift in everybody's notion due to the fact that now there are desalination plants along the shores of Israel, 5 major desalination plants, which all of a sudden bring water from the west to the east and to the south. So it's a different paradigm shift that water is not necessarily coming from the north of Israel, but rather from the west. A whole new system of pipes now being integrated to Jerusalem and others, which was a major challenge for the National Water Company in Israel to build that. So this is a major, major change. And the supply of water is now safe and guaranteed. Actually, there's not even, if you talk to officials in the water authority, there's no water crisis in terms of really the ability to provide water to the consumers, to us, to the people. There's always now will be the ability to do so due to the desalination plant along the shores of Israel. Nevertheless, it is not to say in terms of the Sea of Galilee and other aquifers, it could be an irreversible damage to those aquifers, salinity and whatever the balance has been changed. But in terms of providing water, it is guaranteed. And this was a major effort. The national water carrier that up till a few years ago was, was providing water to the state of Israel, mostly to the south part, was actually a major effort, taking water from the Sea of Galilee, pumping it up like 200 meters. You can see here at the right-hand side of the slide, and then all the way to crossing Israel all the way to the south. This was a major operation. By the way, a lot of electricity. Kinrot is the largest energy consumption energy consumer in Israel. About 7 or 8% of the total energy consumption in Israel is owned by Kinrot due to the pumping and the large infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. And now, as I said, 5 desalination plants, some of which are the largest desalination plant worldwide. So the one in Ashdod, the one in Sorek, you see the pictures here. This is the one in Ashkelon, which was the largest worldwide, over 100 million cubic meter per year. Now the one, which is written below, called Sorek, 150 million cubic meter per year. So these are the largest desalination plant, reverse osmosis desalination plants worldwide. Now there's been some others which are being established. In terms of reusing water, being smart and effective about our water, reusing water, in Israel, this is something that we've been doing for so many years, and it's considered to be a natural resource on our end. This is not a waste, but water and wastewater which are going through reuse. This is the Shafdan, the largest wastewater treatment plant in the Middle East, which basically is part of this system of reusing that we capture the world record. Israel is reusing close to 80% of its water that goes back to the agriculture. This is a world record. The second country to do so is Spain with 17%, Australia with 10%, even though, Australia up till a few years ago, they've been suffering from over a decade with a major, major drought. And even when I was in Kinrot, I was hosting delegations that came over from Australia over and over again just to learn how you reuse water. All of a sudden, they acknowledge the fact that they cannot pour the water back to the ocean, their wastewater, and they need to reuse that. So they came to Israel in order to learn how to do that. So there's a lot of know and expertise related to the reuse of water. And basically, just to get a sense, there's the recharge basin over there that you see. There's a sand filtration mechanism. The water goes to basically through a sand filtration, and for 3 months lies there, and then being pumped up again to the system, goes about 90 kilometers all the way to the south for irrigation. This is a lot of process, and the water quality may get to what is defined as randomly drinked by people. So if every now and then we take those wastewater, drink them, nothing will happen. Similar, by the way, to the level of quality which has been reused in Singapore. In Singapore, those of you who've been there, you can have those bottles of water from the wastewater treatment plants called the new plant. It's a psychological barrier to drink it initially. I was given it a few years ago, and I was like a group of 15 people. I said, what the hell, I drank it. But truly, the population in Singapore is now getting used to the fact that some of their wastewater are being injected again to the aquifer in order to psychologically get them used to understand that one day, probably all of us, maybe worldwide, generally speaking, need to drink wastewater, treated wastewater. So this is where the world is heading. And obviously, if this is a reverse osmosis treatment, nothing will go through those membranes. But nevertheless, the psychological barrier is still there. So this is part of the process. Dripping irrigation, which was mentioned just previously, Israel established some of the largest dripping irrigation companies worldwide, and it's still, the potential is huge. Those complexities also bring about some financial business complexities on the water authority side. How you take different water costs, desalination, brackish water desalination as opposed to seawater desalination, totally different cost. If you take the reuse of water, how you do that. So there's a whole of the pricing and the economy behind it. There's a whole lot of challenges which are related to that. Unfortunately in Israel, or fortunately, Water prices has been gone up for the last few years. In some cases in the US, in other places, sometimes you don't even pay for water. I was invited, for example, to speak in Ireland about a year and a half ago by the Israeli embassy, by the Israeli ambassador, and I was speaking in front of 15 ambassadors over breakfast. And then someone raised the question of, Assaf, do you know that here in Ireland, for the first time, they would like to charge for water? I said, what do you mean charge? He said, yes. Now there's been some attempts, a lot of frustration by the population, but basically you could have leave your home with the tap water open, come back after a week, not pay for water. I was like amazed. So they asked me, and later on I was a keynote in a different conference, and said, Assaf, do you think we should be paying for water? I said, you guys should definitely pay for water. There's an equation here, guys. What do you mean? There's a production cost and there's a cost. The cost should be covered. But those abnormalities, some people see water as a human right even. Up till these days, it's a human right like air. You know, we shouldn't be paying for water. So pricing of water is a major, major issue that gets into very interesting discussions. The Israeli government has actually acknowledged that business opportunity back in 2006, taking the know-how and expertise that were in Israel, and has decided to look into a business opportunity. And I have to say, this is the first time in the Israeli government history that the government look into a business opportunity and not into a market failure. You know, so many times, basically, governments are handling market failures. Security, welfare, health. These are market failures. Not too many times the government, as a government, looks into business opportunity. And the Israeli government done so in 2006, and for the first time in its history, look into the business opportunity in water and establish what is called the New Tech Water Program. Later on, it was expanded to energy as well under the Ministry of Energy, under the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Labor. Now it's called the Economy Ministry. But this is actually the business opportunity that the government has decided. Part of that is strengthening human capital, promoting R&D, this conference that was discussed every other year, which is held in Israel. So there's an ecosystem, an involved ecosystem now also supported by the government in order to have more and more technologies, export their technologies and products out of Israel. This is basically, Moses hit the rock so many years ago and was able, I don't know how, but it was able, this is a disruptive technology to be able to take water out of the rock so many years ago. And when the people of Israel exited the Egyptian Sea, that probably would have been the first exit in the water industry. So we have a track record in Israel. This is part of what we're hoping to establish more and more. And this is what also we were looking to do in Kinrot Ventures, which I was managing for 6 years. A bit of one of the platforms within the Israeli ecosystem is the incubation system. We have about 20 incubators in Israel, some of which are focused on different technologies. Kinrot Ventures was purely focusing on water-related technologies, water and energy, water and agriculture. We had 13 startup companies. We invested about $1 million, take equity, anything between 30 to 50% of equity within each and every startup company. And basically, we were acquired by Hutchinson about a year and a half ago, which designated close to $30 million to Kinrot and has provided us with a true potential of companies that may go and play that game with secure their funding and capital, which is very, very important. Hutchinson, for those of you who don't know, it's a conglomerate based in Hong Kong with over 250,000 employees, over a turnover of close to now $60 billion. It's a huge, huge player with over 1,100 companies. They had the Israeli Orange Partner brand in Israel, and now they bought Kinrot Ventures, which I'm very proud with. Basically, the need for startup companies to play with the big guys, I think it's essential. This is why I'm emphasizing that deal. 12 startup companies as Kinrot Ventures, the largest probably seed investor worldwide. We brought in Hutchinson, but nevertheless, back in 2010, I've signed with Heino Markov, the CEO of GE Water, a cooperation strategic agreement, also with the PUB in Singapore, the National Public Utility Board, in Singapore. This is a must on my eyes. This is something that startup companies, they got to go and look for strategic partners. They cannot do it on their own. As a standalone companies, it's going to be very, very tough. And so many times, specifically here in the US, you say, how you dance with the gorillas, right? How you dance with the big guys, with the corporates. So one of the things, for instance, that I've offered GE and Heino Markov, the CEO, I said, you guys have so many patents, on-the-shelf patents, maybe in this university as well. Why don't you license to us some of your patents? You're not going to go through R&D in each and every patent of yours, right? Some of them will be neglected on the shelf. You're going to be paying the IP cost for 12, 15 years. So why don't you give it to us as partners now? And actually, they were very happy about it. They did give it to us, one or two. We were looking into investing and building up startup companies. This is our focus as Kinrot Ventures back at the time. Build companies, bring in the team, invest $1 million, and simply give a chance to technology that otherwise will be lying on the shelf for the next 12, 15 years. So you have to be creative and come up with the business innovation ideas in order to make some stuff happen. Some of those examples. Recalls. In the US, everywhere else, the Coca-Colas of the world, and this was out there in the papers. So Nestle, Slimfast, they have their products been recalled from supermarkets. You know why this has been happening? For over close to 100 years, we have this gold standard test called CFU, Colony Forming Unit Test. This is the time that those colonies of germs grow from one little guy into a colony. And basically it takes 2 to 3 days, right? Bottled water companies, at the meantime, they send their bottles to the supermarkets. And this is why eventually, after 2 or 3 days, they get back the results from the laboratory. They're doing the Petri dishes test, and they're culturing the plates. And basically, they're getting this phone call and said, oops, you know what, that shipment 2 or 3 days ago, that had E. coli, which are indicators to something that has happened into the water. And therefore, they need to do recalls from the supermarkets. Their shares are falling down in the stock exchange. And otherwise. So this company, for instance, called TA Count, is actually doing the same equivalent test in 5 minutes. Basically, that company came up with a disruptive technology. They can look into unique membrane activity of the germs, these are bacteria and germs and viruses and yeast and molds, and they can look into those little germs, but those living ones, and not the dead ones, but living and reproducible ones. In a way, this is like a pregnancy test. There's no need to wait 9 months till those guys give birth. We simply see in advance which of those little guys will give birth through that unique membrane activity, and basically can do the same equivalent test in 5 minutes. Imagine the value for the food and beverage industry if you come up with that technology that can save the recalls. And this is an application in the water industry. Don't think about water industry, just the main pipes and project and desalination. This is a water industry example of a new interesting technology. They won some awards, global awards, very interesting company. Hutchinson, by the way, I brought them in to invest prior to the acquisition of Keynote as well. Leak detection. You see the map over there on the right side of the slide. The red dots are simply big, major leaks within the pipes of municipalities, which they didn't have a clue about. Before that, they didn't have a clue. This is an acoustic system that can listen to that music under the ground and basically detect that and give, with a friendly user interface, can give to the municipalities eyes to see what's going on under the ground. This company, for instance, took me 5 years. I was the chairman of most of those companies, so very active with them to go to the marketplace. Took us 5 years to have the first commercial installation in the city of Netanya in Israel. 5 years for development, 5 years for finding the first commercial installation, which was subsidized by the Israeli government, which is a great support under the New Tech program. So this is another example of water companies that we had. Wastewater treatment plant. 1% of the total energy consumption on our planet is designated to wastewater, which is an amazing number. And 50% of which is designated to aeration process. The germs, the good germs, basically eat the bad germs. And they need oxygen. Like those of you who have aquariums in your house, this is the same kind of idea. Germs need oxygen. Aeration process costs 50% of the aeration of the overall treatment. Diffuser is a company that we had. Now it's a bit shaky, I have to say, but it's a company that we had that cutting down the aeration process by 50%. 50%. Imagine the amounts of savings that one can do with in terms of implementing that with no downtime. This is one of those technologies that we were looking into, and very, very tough to bring this to the marketplace as well. So on one hand, the huge potential, on the other hand, the conservativeness may kill companies. The last example is a company called Hydrospin, energy harvesting within pipes. Now the world is moving to smart infrastructure. They want to do more and more testing, more and more data within cities like in Barcelona and elsewhere. So these are the applications that will allow eventually the ability, enablers, to have energy for those sensors to work. Pressure, flow, water quality, whatever the application sensor you want to have on the pipe, this is within the pipe, an enabler that provides the energy consumption. Some companies, as investors, you have to shut down. This is part of the game. Probably maybe the only example that I've been using for my former basketball career. You win some, you lose some. This is unfortunately part of the game. As a venture capitalist, something that I acknowledge very well. Sometimes you need simply to kill a company because of whatever, bad entrepreneurs, bad technologies, not cost-effective enough technology. It's part of the game. It's okay to win. It's okay to lose every now and then and shut down some of those companies. It's part of the game. Just last few slides. In terms of innovation, now my focus is really on this big word called innovation. So it is a big word. And this is, for instance, a new concept which was brought about by MIT and an institution in Korea about desalination. So on one end, you have like desalinated water, and on the other, you have the salt coming out. This looks perfect, totally disruptive technology, right? But the major question is, if you look for that, goldfish underneath, everybody's looking for that goldfish, is scalability. With all due respect to that disruptive technology, could that be scalable? Could that be brought for a village in India for 5,000 people and really serve those people? I doubt it, And this is part of the complexities. This is part of the challenges that we have in that industry. It seems amazing, right? But it probably will not go anywhere. So it will remain within the R&D. And talking about R&D, so many times we write the R&D like that, close to one another. In the water industry, sometimes like other industries, my own belief is that you write R, a little r, which is, let's say, a pure research, then an applied research, who knows, and then a capital R eventually. It's a true research which hopefully an applied and applicable for some kind of product out there in the market, and then a small development, and maybe eventually a capital D development of a product. R and D maybe not be written so close to one another, but rather separately, with small ones and big ones, and eventually capital R and capital D. That process may take 3, 5, 7 years sometimes. It's a lot of money, a lot of time. This is not internet. In internet, you can come up with 8 months and develop a product, a gaming application. R&D, chemistry, test results, laboratory, sent back and forth. This is a lot of time, a lot of capital. It has to be acknowledged by those who want to play the game. I think we need to play the game, but it has to be acknowledged in terms of the timeline and the setting the expectations right. All right, the last 2 slides that I have is these 2 bottom one, innovative business model, not just innovative technologies. Innovative business models are a must in this industry as well, and innovative financing model, which are also a must. And innovation, is a constant search for capital, search for people, search for the right application. Nabokov said that an African who can think about snow is like a genius. We don't need genius, but we really need to be creative in this very conservative industry in order to come up with solutions to those challenges. And my last slide is about the people. Investment, disruptive, non-disruptive, whatever it may be. Eventually, as investors, we're looking for big enough markets. We're looking for barriers to entry. We're looking for technology with good IP. But I think it's all about the people that can go through the ups and downs, the challenges, specifically in the water industry, clean tech industry. There's a lot of challenges, a lot of time, and a lot of up and downs that one needs to go through in order to be successful. And if you say, show me the money, as Tom Cruise was saying, show me the money, eventually in order to see the money, you have to see the people and their ability to go through those ups and downs and bring successful companies to the marketplace. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to improvise here. I said one question afterwards. We'll take more than one question because I know that Assaf is going to run over to the World Bank very, very soon. So quick questions from the audience for Assaf Barnea. Please.
I'm Steve Traver from Congressman Pierce's staff from New Mexico. At the APAC get-together yesterday, we were talking about the public-private partnerships involved in creating the last couple of desal plants in Israel. I'd like your opinion on how that's working out and whether that's a model that might be followed other places in the world.
The desal?
Yes, using private capital to build them with a guaranteed contract from the government.
This is what actually we've been doing in Israel, and this is the method in Israel. The government is conducting a bid, setting out the price of water, which the government will be willing to pay for the next 20, 25 years on a BOT, build, operate, transfer. So Actually, there's been some cases whereby, for instance, Kinrot had to argue with Kinrot, the national water company, had to argue with the government for like 2 years. This is including the courts and stuff for that pricing of water. In one of my slides, there was a pricing of desalinated water from seawater desalination, whether it was 57 cents or 51 cents. The government was willing to pay like, I don't know, 51, 52. Kinrot was willing to come up with building up that project, but eventually the price of water, which they saw in their eyes, what about, I think, 57, like 3-4 cents. That's that. It was 2 years struggle, which eventually they came up with, they mitigated somehow. But this is exactly that. The government is guaranteeing that purchase of water in a certain criteria, certain price of the water, and whether Kinrot or private companies such as ID and others in Israel, the Israeli desalination company, Hutchinson and others, are participating as private market and building up those desalination plants, eventually to be sold to the government through Kinrot infrastructure to the municipalities.
Assaf, we have to apologize, but other panelists also have to leave with you. So we are going to thank you once again.